The morning sun in the village usually brought a sense of hope and new beginnings, but for Amara, it meant the start of a journey she had to take every single day. The air was thick and humid, filled with the sounds of neighbors waking up to cook breakfast, but Amara was already far from the safety of her home. Her heart beat fast in her chest, not out of excitement, but out of a deep, aching worry that never truly left her. She adjusted the strap of her school bag, which felt heavier than the books inside, and began walking toward the part of the village where the street lights flickered and died out first. She was only 19, an age where many girls her age were busy dreaming about their future, thinking about fashion, or worrying about their grades in school. While those thoughts were there for Amara, they were buried under a heavy blanket of reality that she had carried for as long as she could remember. Her mother had left them a long time ago, tired of the cycle of pain that had taken over their house because of her father, Baba Nana. He was a man who had once been strong and respected, but the bottle had stolen his spirit and left a hollow shell in his place. Every morning, before the school bell rang, Amara's first duty was not to her textbooks, but to her father. She walked past the small, dusty stalls where the scent of frying akara filled the air, trying to ignore the whispers of the people who knew her. Some looked at her with pity, their faces tight with sympathy, while others just shook their heads, their eyes judging a situation they didn't have to live through. Amara kept her head down, her dark eyes scanning the ground and the doorways of the local bars that were slowly closing for the night. She knew the rhythm of his habits by heart. She knew which bars he favored when he felt sad, and which ones he chose when he wanted to forget everything. When she finally spotted him, her breath hitched. There he was, slumped over on a wooden bench outside a dark, quiet bar, his clothes dusty and disheveled from sleeping on the cold ground. He looked so small, so broken, that it made Amara want to cry, but she had no time for tears. She wiped her face quickly, took a deep, steadying breath, and walked over to him. She touched his shoulder, whispering his name softly so as not to startle him, even though he was deep in a sleep that was not peaceful. When he groaned and struggled to open his eyes, the smell of the strong drink that had consumed him filled the air, a scent that had become the unwanted companion of Amara's youth. She didn't scold him, she didn't scream or demand to know why he had done this again, because she knew that words would not reach him in this state. Instead, she acted with the quiet patience of a saint. She helped him up, his weight leaning heavily against her small, slender frame. It was a struggle to get him to his feet, her own muscles straining under the pressure, but she found a hidden strength that seemed to come from a place of pure, unconditional love. She walked with him slowly, step by agonizing step, down the dirt road that led back to their humble home. People stopped to watch, and she could hear the muffled giggles of some of her classmates who were walking toward the school building. The sound of their laughter felt like needles pricking at her skin, but she refused to let it break her. She gripped her father's arm tighter, telling herself that this man was her blood, her history, and her responsibility. Regardless of how much he had forgotten that he was once a father who should be leading her. As they finally reached their doorway, the sun began to climb higher, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She helped him inside, making sure he was comfortable on the mat where he could rest, then she turned back to the door. Her school bag was waiting, and she knew she had a long day ahead of her. The walk to school was long, and she was already tired before the first lesson began, but she pushed herself forward. She thought about her mother, who was now a distant memory, and wondered if she ever thought about the daughter she left behind in the care of a broken man. The pain of that abandonment lingered in the corners of her mind, but she refused to let it turn her heart cold. She was Amara, and she had decided that she would be the one to break the chain of suffering, even if she had to walk the path alone. She walked through the school gate, smoothing her uniform, and tried to wash the smell of the bar and the shame of the morning from her mind, preparing to face the world as a student. holding on to the flickering hope that she could make something better of her life.
Hey everyone! Before we dive into the rest of today's video, I want to take a quick second to ask you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel grow and ensures you don't miss out on any of the awesome content we have coming up next. It only takes a second, and it means the world to me. Once you've done that, let's keep going.
The walk from the house to the school gate was always a silent battleground for Amara. After tucking her father into his mat and ensuring he had a cup of cool water nearby, she had to transform from a caretaker back into a student. By the time she reached the dusty roadside where she did her daily business, the sun was already beating down with a fierce, unforgiving intensity. Before she could even think about opening her books, she had to work. Her small table, balanced precariously on the uneven earth, held a plastic basin covered with a clean cloth. Underneath were the snacks she prepared every single evening, moin moin and fried groundnuts that she hoped would sell quickly. The smell of the hot, spicy snacks was her only source of comfort as she stood there, her stomach growling because she had given her own portion of food to her father that morning. She watched the people pass by, some rushing to their offices, others heading to the market, and she prayed for a customer to stop. Every coin she earned was a tiny, precious brick being laid toward the foundation of her future, a future that felt very far away in moments like these. As the morning went on, groups of students began to arrive in their crisp, ironed uniforms, their bags filled with nothing heavier than notebooks and pens. When they saw Amara standing by her table, the whispers began again, just as they had every day. Some of the wealthier girls, girls who didn't know what it meant to miss a meal, would walk past and giggle behind their hands, pointing at the stain on her skirt from where her father had leaned on her earlier. They didn't know the story behind the stain, and they didn't care to ask, for it was easier to mock what they couldn't understand. Amara would hold her head high, focusing her gaze on the horizon, pretending that their sharp words were nothing more than the buzzing of flies. She knew that if she listened to them, she would lose her way, and she had no room for failure. She had to sell these snacks to pay the school fees that were already 2 months late. The principal, a man with a stern face and very little patience, had already warned her that if the money did not come soon, she would not be allowed to sit for her final examinations. The fear of not finishing school was a cold, hard lump in her throat, a fear much greater than the embarrassment of the street. She was in her second to last year, so close to the finish line, yet it felt as though an entire ocean stood between her and graduation. A woman from the nearby market, Mama Chinedu, eventually stopped by, her face softening when she saw the look of determination in Amara's eyes. She bought 2 pieces of moin moin and gave Amara a small encouraging nod that meant more than any amount of money. For a brief moment, the heavy weight on Amara's shoulders lightened just a little bit. She realized then that she was not entirely alone in the world. There were people who saw her struggle and respected it. However, the relief was short-lived as she saw a group of boys from her class approaching, their faces twisted in that familiar, cruel mockery. One of them, a boy named Obina, made a loud, exaggerated comment about the bar runner who smelled of stale ale. Amara felt her heart drop, but she did not break. She carefully wrapped the next order of snacks, her hands moving with a steady, practiced grace that defied the shaking inside her chest. She remembered her father as he used to be the man who told her that her name, Amara, meant grace, and that she should always carry it with her, even when the world tried to strip it away. She took a deep breath, looked Obina in the eye, and spoke with a voice that was soft but firm, telling him that she was working for her future, and that there was no shame in honest labor. The boy looked surprised, his laughter faltering as he realized she was not going to give him the reaction he wanted. He walked away, muttering something under his breath, but the power had shifted. Amara turned back to her task, her eyes stinging with unshed tears that she refused to let fall. She knew the day would be long, and she knew the journey back home to her father would be just as difficult as the morning had been, but she also knew she was stronger than any of them could imagine. She was building a life, one snack at a time, and she would not let the cruelty of others tear it down. The rainy season in the village was always a test of endurance, but that year the heavens seemed to pour down with a particular relentless anger. The heavy downpour turned the dusty paths into thick, slippery mud, making every step a challenge of balance and will. Amara had been in the classroom for hours, her mind struggling to focus on the complex history lessons as her clothes clung to her skin, damp and cold from the walk to school. That afternoon, the wind howled around the school building, rattling the rusted zinc roof with a terrifying intensity. In the middle of a lecture, a young neighbor child burst into the classroom, his face pale and his breathing ragged. He told her that her father had collapsed near the entrance of the main market, right in the middle of the deluge. Amara did not hesitate. She did not even ask for permission from her teacher. She grabbed her bag, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, and ran out into the storm. The world was a blur of grey rain and splashing mud as she sprinted toward the market. Her thin school shoes were ruined, her uniform was plastered to her body, and the biting wind chilled her to the bone, but she did not feel it. All she could see in her mind's eye was her father, lying vulnerable and alone in the mud, with people stepping around him as if he were merely an obstacle in their path. When she finally reached the market, she found a small crowd gathered under the shelter of a store awning. There he was, slumped against a stack of crates, his breathing shallow and his face pale, looking more fragile than she had ever seen him. The sight was a sharp, jagged pain that pierced her heart, a realization that her constant care might not be enough to hold back the tide of his decline forever. She fell to her knees in the mud beside him, ignoring the mud that stained her clothes, and pulled his head onto her lap. "Papa, look at me," she pleaded, her voice trembling as she wiped the rain and grime from his forehead. He groaned, his eyelids fluttering weakly, but he did not seem to recognize her at first. The people around them watched with a mixture of morbid curiosity and pity, but for once Amara did not care about their gaze or their judgments. She felt an overwhelming sense of frustration and fear, the sheer exhaustion of her life, of working, of studying, of being a daughter and a mother to her own father, suddenly seemed to reach a breaking point. She felt the tears finally breaking through, hot and fast, mixing with the cold rainwater on her face. She whispered prayers into the storm, begging for him to wake up, begging for a sign that he was still there, beneath the haze of the alcohol. It was the moment she felt the closest to giving up, the moment where the weight of her reality felt heavy enough to crush the very bones in her body. As the rain began to subside, leaving behind a heavy, dripping silence, her father finally let out a long, shuddering breath. His eyes focused on her face, and for a fleeting second, the fog in them seemed to lift. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw a flash of profound sadness and recognition that he usually kept buried deep within. "Amara," he whispered, his voice as thin as a dry leaf. "My little girl, you shouldn't be here." Those few words, spoken with such clarity, cracked the dam of her composure. She pressed her forehead against his, and they sat there in the quiet aftermath of the storm, two broken souls clinging to each other in the mud of their existence. She knew then that this was the lowest point, the moment where the life she had been fighting for seemed to slip through her fingers. Yet as she helped him stand, she realized that even here, in the cold and the wet, she had the strength to stand up. She would not let this be the end, not for him, and certainly not for her.